Hey everyone, and welcome to Doge's Emporium of Dungeons & Dragons horror stories. In today's episode, we have a tale about a group of that guyest Murderhobos, a story about one neckbeard to rule them all, and much more. So, let's get into it, and a quick content warning for the first one, as it contains mentions of, well, everything you could imagine a group of Murderhobos doing. So, if you would like to skip it, you can go to this timecode here. But with that said, let's get into the story. Make sure to participate in Session Zeros by Reddit user NarrowAd8957. Let me start off with a disclaimer. There's a lot of triggering stuff in this story, and it constantly gets worse. The cast consists of me as the DM, and the party, a Kenku, a Centaur, a half-elf, a half-orc, a dragonborn, and a halfling. Many years ago, when I started DMing, I was unaware of many of the common yes and no's of D&D. Nevertheless, I read through the books, determined to run a good and fun game for a group of people that I knew. And like all good games, we had a Session Zero. I ran through the basic questions, helped with character creation, helped to teach the system, despite barely knowing it myself, and most importantly, tried to establish boundaries for everyone. I asked what everyone would be comfortable with, and gave some mild examples. I'd even be willing to avoid combat or death if it was something that would bother someone. But everyone just said that they were good with whatever came along, and that they didn't have anything they wanted to avoid. I said that I really didn't mind anything, and I was willing to go outside of my own comfort zone in order to make a fun game. But if it got to be too severe, that I wouldn't narrate it, but just acknowledge that it happened and move on. Our first few sessions were filled with the players using dismemberment, severe torture, forced suicide, and such creative ideas as tying goblins together by the hair and lighting them on fire, forced cannibalism for the prisoners so as not to waste their own food, poisoning a food supply so that they could watch an eating contest rapidly fall apart, etc. Well, that's quite the laundry list of that guyisms. As far as everything went, they were pretty okay with how they were playing, and said that they had fun. I framed everything as kind of goofy to try and avoid the severe nature of what they were doing. But edge is edge, and eventually, it cuts. A new player was invited, the Centaur. So I decided to host a session 0.5, helped with the character creation and character updates, summed up the campaign so far, and revisited the boundaries. I explained to the new player everything that had happened, and asked if that crossed any of their limits, and they said no. I asked everyone else if they would like to re-establish their boundaries now that they were more familiar with how things worked, and was met with some general silence. So I asked again, and everyone responded with a generalized, "It's all good." The next session, the Centaur meets the party traveling on the road looking for work. After some light discourse, they are ambushed by goblins. The Centaur told me that they were making non-lethal attacks against the goblins, and this made me smile as it was kind of nice, and it could lead to some neat roleplay. I was wrong. After the battle was over, they tied up the survivors individually. The Centaur said that they were going to pick up one of the goblins and wake it up. I described the goblin waking up in fear, being captured by the group of people that they just tried to attack. The Centaur character then said that they proceed to rape the goblin to death. Naturally, I was caught very off guard and simply responded with, "Alright then, he has died." The player begins to graphically describe their horse genitalia, literally tearing the goblin's insides. Jesus, what the f? And begins to peer pressure the other players to try to do the same, and some of them did. The Kenku and half-orc just kinda went with it, though there was a hint of discomfort in their voices. I told myself that I was just caught off guard, and that they said nothing was really off limits in Session 0. So it's probably just me. They proceed to wake up, then rape to death every goblin they had captured. I kind of brushed it under the rug, as I said I wouldn't narrate things that made me uncomfortable, but I was still willing to facilitate the game. And the rest of the session was filled with rape, necrophilia, and a severe focus on castration. When the session was over, I was asked by the Centaur player why I wasn't narrating their moments of less than normal escapades. I explained again that I simply didn't narrate stuff that I was uncomfortable with. Then the player freaks out and starts taking it like a personal attack on themselves, and starts accusing me of bigotry, sexism, and racism in front of everyone. Wait, what? Which, thankfully and somewhat wholesomely, confused the rest of the players who came to my aid and defended me against her rants of targeting her in combat because she's LGBT+. That I was not narrating her actions because she's a woman, and when asked by the half-elf about how I was even being racist, she responded with, and I'm paraphrasing here, "He's obviously discriminating against me because I'm a centaur and not some normal race." What? After every accusation was thrown at me, leaving me flabbergasted for the sudden shift in tone and topic, I just left, not wanting to fan the flames of argument, and I felt like crap for having a part in ruining a game that people were enjoying. I was later texted by a few players who explained that they had lied in Session 0 about not having boundaries because they didn't want to be the person who was the wimp or ruin the fun of the game, and they asked if I was still willing to DM. After everything was said and done, I started a new game with the Dragonborn, Kenku, and Half-Orc, with some actual boundaries set in Session 0 that's still going to this day. Remember, always participate in Session 0. And if you meet a problem player like this one, don't let it ruin your experience. Talk with your players and move on without them. Holy hell, talk about a gaggle of that guys in Murderhobos. And the Centaur was the queen of all of them. Seriously, those accusations she threw at DM were laughable at best. This just goes to show why Session 0s are an important thing when it comes to D&D. And I can understand not wanting to be perceived as the person that is a buzzkill, but I think a lot of the things that were done in this game wouldn't be a big ask not to have in it. Though, when it comes to setting boundaries, maybe have the players send what they would not want in a game privately. That way, no one would feel like they were being singled out. Also, as a DM, you can set boundaries as well. Thankfully, it sounds like OP and some of the players realized this and are playing together to this day, without the things that happened in that first game. Let's move on. Never Made It Past Session 0 by Reddit user Ryoji Kaji 79. This happened about 18 years ago. I had just graduated college and moved to a new city and state for a job. I was jonesing for some sweet 3.5e, and as luck would have it, my local game store was advertising a new game that was starting. I applied, and I got in. We were asked to make characters from the player's handbook and come to Session 0 that weekend. So here's the setup. A mage, a female, a bard, male, a rogue, a female, and I think was a friend of the mage, and myself, druid, a male. We were going around the table and stating what we were playing. It got to me, and I said I was playing a female half-elf druid. This is where the ride went off the rails. The DM looked pale when I said I was playing a female. He immediately vetoed the idea. Okay. I was thinking to myself that maybe he didn't allow gender bending, or had some weird hatred towards half-elves or druids. Well, I didn't even get the chance to ask, because the mouth breather of a DM decided to announce why he had an issue. He stated that no man could play a female, and that no female could play a male, because he wants to be able to picture the actual female nude. But wait, there's more. He then went into more excitement about how he not only pictured them nude, but he would write fanfiction about how he had his way with not only the character, but the actual player too. He then looked at the two guys and said, "I mean, you get it right. You can't play a girl because we men can't have fantasies about a dude being naked." And we were done. I started to nope the hell out of there. The ladies looked absolutely disgusted, and the bard couldn't do anything but laugh at the DM. This infuriated and upset the DM to no end, I'm guessing, as he turned about 11 shades of purple and red. And he threw a temper tantrum and threw the books he had across the local game store floor. I never went back to that store again. Now that sounds like some overpowered neckbeard energy right there. How did the DM think people would react, especially with 2 women sitting at the table? I wouldn't blame anyone for not wanting to play with that DM, and I probably would be laughing like the bard was for how cringe the whole situation was. Though, why would OP not go to that game store again? It's not the store's fault the dude was a creep, unless the DM was the store owner. Anyways, those are just my thoughts. Let's move on. Player wants to rejoin after they ghosted the campaign. By Reddit user Historical Hotel 830. As per usual, this story starts on Roll20 and with a random group of strangers. When you run longer campaigns, sometimes you have to replace a player as life gets in the way or schedules change. So until 2 weeks ago, that guy was just someone who mysteriously disappeared. That guy had joined the campaign from Session 0. He rolled up a nice little human fighter, was getting along with everyone, and seemed to be excited about where the campaign was going, sending me and the other players messages. We're on week 13, and he just never shows up. I messaged him to ask if he's okay, but got no reply. The party does some side missions, not wanting him to miss out, but the next week, it was the same thing, but this time, when I try to message him, he's blocked me, as well as the other players. At this point, I cut my losses and move on. The players want to wait a few more weeks, just in case, so they drag his character around for a little bit. She ends up dying in a haunted house, the tragic victim of a banshee, and because of her noble sacrifice, the party managed to break the curse, and the fighter is memorialized in statue that the party paid for, and I thought that was that. Until 2 years later, he messages me out of the blue. "Hey, I know it's been a few weeks, but I was wondering if you have any space in the game left. I've really been missing my fighter, and I want to see how our story ends." I have no idea how to respond, but it's definitely a no. Your suggestions are welcome. Update. I messaged him back. I asked him if he was alright and pointed out how long it had been. He said he was fine, but I asked him where he'd been and why he hadn't shown up before, just to give him the benefit of the doubt. I told him that if something was going on that he didn't want to talk about, all he had to do was say something was going on, and I'd leave it at that. Whoever had suggested in the comments that he'd left to join a new campaign, and now that one was over, and he wanted back in mine, was right. An in-real-life friend had invited him to a different game, so he just dropped ours. The first week that he missed was him testing out the new game. I asked him why he blocked us, and apparently another player who left the campaign about 8 months later when his work schedule changed, and I haven't heard from since, was a bit spammy with his messages, and it overwhelmed that guy. I have no idea if that was BS or not. The other player didn't strike me as the kind of person to harass someone, but I do understand that the benchmark for being overwhelmed is different for everyone. He asked about the fighter, so I told him what happened. He was mad. He said I didn't have the right to kill her, but when I pointed out that she was only there because the other players wanted to make sure that he could come back if he wanted, he calmed down. I thanked him for talking to me and told him that all my games are full, but if a space came up, I'd let him know. I probably won't message him again though. Well, that story was different. How the hell does someone disappear for 2 years and then come back, letting you know that he left for another game without telling anybody, and then expect to be welcomed back with open arms? And then they have the gall to get angry when they find out their character isn't around anymore? I don't blame OP if they never wanted to invite this person to any future games. I mean, what? Anyways, let's move on. And before we get into the last story of the day, I should ask that if you're enjoying the video, that you roll a crit on that like button, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you need some more convincing, here is Simba spinning in a chair. But with that said, let's get into it. Controlling and Petty DM by Reddit user Erised2022. Hello. This story happened to my husband years ago when he joined a gaming group at a local gaming store. His character was a dwarf, and he told the DM that unless he said otherwise, his character was only speaking in Dwarven. The DM told him that that was not acceptable, and that he had to say the words, "I am speaking in Dwarven," before every single sentence spoke. My husband wrote a note with those words on them and held it up every time he spoke in character, and the DM kept glaring at him, but did not say anything else about it. They were in a dungeon, and my husband was playing the rogue. He had to describe exactly where he was searching for traps each time he rolled. Like, he had to roll separately for the floors, the walls, the ceilings, things like that. The one time he did not mention a surface specifically in the 5-hour game, the DM had a trap on the surface he did not check. During another session, there was a body of a bad guy up in a loft. My husband went up to the loft and said that he was searching the body. The DM had him roll, and he rolled really well. I think it was a 19 on the die. The DM said he did not find anything, so he threw the body down to the ground. The DM then said, "Okay, you hear a crash, like breaking glass." My husband investigated and was told that a potion bottle had broken. He said, "But I searched the body." And the DM's response was, "You didn't say you were searching the pockets." So apparently, when my husband said he was searching the body, the DM thought he meant a body cavity search, and not searching the clothing the body was wearing. Has anybody else had any similar experiences? If so, how did you handle it? In my opinion, while yes, having a character only speak in a language that is not common could be interesting for roleplay reasons, I can understand why a DM may not want that to be a thing. Though, at the same time, all the DM had to do was say no and give his reasonings. Instead, the DM gave a rule, and even though the dwarf player followed said rule, the DM still held a grudge. I mean, with the searching of the body with a good roll and not finding a potion bottle, it's pretty obvious that the DM was just being a dick. Have you ever had a DM like this? If so, let us know in the comments. And that will do it for today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may all of your games remain that guy and Murderhobo free. Until next time.